Did you know that over 10 million tons of furniture ends up in North American landfills each and every year? I found this table out at the curb for trash, and I'm about to show you how I refinished it to give it a second chance at life. I feel like this is one of those universal furniture pieces that everyone has owned or knows someone who owned at some point. This one's in pretty decent condition still, and I'm actually a little surprised that it got put out at the curb and didn't get dropped off at a thrift store for donation. But I won't complain about a free furniture project. I think my plan is going to be to strip this outdated yellowy orange tone off of the top and restain it in a more contemporary colorway. And then I'll probably just paint the base and maybe the apron around the top in a more modern color too. The top of this table is oak, which I find to be one of the most easily identifiable wood grains. There's a little bit of paint and some glitter glue on here, a few minor scratches, and some patches where the original finish has worn away. Oh, and this little chunk missing out of the edge where it opens in the middle for its extension. I got extra lucky because they left the leaf out with it too. It's stamped on the bottom with the importer's name and also a made in Malaysia 0905 mark and this September 2005. So this thing is coming up on its 20th birthday next fall. Lucky again with the base that all of the screws are taped on here for me. It's a different kind of wood though, with a much different grain pattern. It's probably like a rubber wood, which has become pretty common in a lot of furniture that's made overseas. And again, it's in really good shape with just a few light wear marks here and there. Before I decide exactly how I want to go about this refinishing project, I need to figure out what I'm working with, so I know if it's safe to start with sanding the old finish off or if it might be better to use a chemical stripper instead. One of the first things that I look at when I'm trying to figure out if I'm dealing with solid wood or a wood veneer, which is just a really thin layer of wood glued down to something else underneath, is to look at the grain. I can see here that this wood grain is running horizontal to me, but then when I follow it down over the edge, it changes direction and it's running vertically. So I know that this is a wood veneer. If it were solid wood, this grain pattern would follow right down over the edge seamlessly. I can also see when I look at the bottom, the wood grain of the veneer that's down there is not the same as this oak wood grain on top, which means another layer of a different wood under there. And I can see where they've sanded through to make things level, that there is particle board sandwiched in between. You can sand the old finish off of a veneered surface, but especially with something heavy duty like this, you run the risk of removing too much of the wood layer underneath it and essentially ruin your chances of having anything left to restain. I think it would be safer to start with a chemical stripper to get through the toughest of this layer, and then I can use some careful sanding to finish things off. Usually I start by cleaning my furniture, but since I want to use a chemical stripper to get the finish off of this top, I'm not going to worry about cleaning it just yet because the stripper will take care of anything that's on here and is going to make a mess anyway. I will clean off the base though while I'm waiting for the stripper to eat through this finish. I'm using this Green Easy, which is a much more eco-friendly product than some others that I've used, and it's worked really well for me on a few recent projects. I'm just going to pour a good amount on here and then use a chip brush to get a nice thick layer over everything. This stuff does need at least 2 hours to work its magic though, so I'll come back and check on it in a little while. To clean up this base, I'm using some simple green, and I've also got a scrub brush to help me get it really clean. You always want to start off with a squeaky clean surface, but especially since this is a dining table that's surely got some sort of food residue, greasy fingerprints or splatters on it, I need to make sure that I'm getting all of that off and there's nothing left behind that might interfere with my paint making a good bond. Once I've got it all scrubbed, I'll come back with some fresh water and a rag to rinse away the cleaner too. I tightened up all the leg bolts with a wrench so they stopped flopping around, and then I got started with scuff sanding. I usually use my electric sanders for stuff like this because it's faster, and I'm trying to buff or smooth out more scratches and dents than I have to deal with on here. But if your piece is in good condition, it can be just as easy to rub it down with some medium grit sandpaper by hand. This is literally just meant to scuff up the shiny factory finish that's on here and create a bit of texture for the primer and paint to hold on to. Wiping all of this off with my damp microfiber cloth picks up the dust, and once that's dry, I can prime it. This has been marinating now for about 2.5 hours, so I've just got some cardboard out of the recycling box to collect any goop and a metal putty knife to hopefully scrape off the majority of the factory finish on here and really reduce the amount of sanding that I need to do. That did get off a lot of the finish that was on here, but not quite enough for me to be confident to move on to sanding. So I'm just going to apply a second round. I'll let this sit again and scrape it off. Instead of trying to scrape all the finish off of the round edge with a flat scraper, I'm using a little wire brush to scrub it off instead. So to clean up any of the residue that's left behind and any of the natural oils that are in the stripper, which are actually what eat through the finish, I'm going to use Green Easy's Strip and Clean Finishing Cleaner that will get all of that junk off of there. Then I can let this completely dry out again before I start sanding. Before I head out to the garage and start getting all messy, I need to hit the store and grab a few supplies. At Home Depot, I picked up a spray can of Bin shellac-based primer and then stopped into my local Fusion mineral paint retailer to grab a new neutral paint color for the base and a can of their stain and finishing oil in the color Light Oak that I'm going to use on the tabletop. I got the leaf stripped as well last night and it's nice and dry, so these are ready to start sanding. I want to sand to get the wood ready for its new finish and also buff out a couple of the minor scratches. But before I start sanding, I'm going to spray some primer on the base that I want to paint so that it's got some time to dry.
Just realized how freaking cold it is out here today. I need to get the heater running.
This primer bonds really well to pretty much any surface, and it seals in any wood tannins or the natural oils in the wood that can sometimes bleed up and discolor your paint. I'm not too worried about that on here because the original finish is still covering everything, but I do also like to have the added insurance of knowing that I took this step just in case. I'm going to use my orbital sander on the top and start with some 120 grit to remove any bits of finish that's left over and any scratches. And once that's done, I'll do one more sand with some 180 grit to smooth out the wood fibers and get it ready to accept the new protective oil finish. Since this is veneer though, I'm moving extra carefully and making sure not to let the sander sit in any one area for too long, especially around the edges where the wood is naturally a bit thinner. If you're sanding and you start to see the wood grain or the pattern of the wood start to change or disappear, you are sanding right through the veneer and you need to stop. It's pretty much impossible to fix once it's happened without having to call on your inner Bob Ross to paint in a patch of replica wood grain or replace the entire surface with new veneer. To fill in this chunk, I'm using some epoxy putty in a color that's pretty similar to this oak. It's got two parts in the tube that you mix together to start the chemical reaction that hardens it. It only needs about 10 minutes to cure up, and then I can do my final sand. And before I call it quits on sanding, I'm just gonna quickly smooth out this primer. This stain and finishing oil is a wood conditioner, a stain, and a top coat, all in one can. And it's really durable on high traffic surfaces like this. You can even use it on floors. It's a blend of tung oil, linseed oil, and a few different waxes with pigments mixed in. After I give this a good stir, all I need to do is brush it over the wood, let it soak in for 15 or 20 minutes, and then I can wipe off any excess. And if I want to add a bit more color after that, I can add additional coats and I can buff it to increase the sheen, but it does need about 9 hours in between coats and it takes 10 days to fully cure. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, the first layer is fully dry. I'm going to put a second coat on for a little bit more protection and a little bit more color, and we'll see how that looks. While that's sitting doing its thing, I'm going to get started on the first coat of paint for this bottom. We'll start upside down. This is a newly released color from Fusion, and please don't sigh at me about it being beige. This is a dining table, and if we're being smart business people, we know that most potential customers can easily fit a neutral color like this into their spaces. I'm trying to appeal to the masses to find this table a new home. I also happen to love a boring beige moment myself, so sue me. And I'm gonna be brushing this today. I usually spray because it's easier and faster for me, but sometimes sitting on the floor with a paintbrush in your hand can be really relaxing. So yeah, I'm brushing. Oil-based products like this can spontaneously combust if you ball them up and toss them in the trash can, and I don't want any fires in here, so I'm gonna let them breathe. Okay, day 3. I need to get my act together and finish this thing. I do need to get a second coat on this while it's upside down, and then I'll flip it to get the final coat on right way up. And I completely forgot about the apron around the tabletop yesterday, so I need to get some paint on there too. Fusion does stick really well to most surfaces all by itself, so I'm gonna take the risk and just skip primer on here. I might regret my decision in a minute, but I think it's gonna be okay. Once the top is dry enough for me to flip this over, I will, and I'll clean up the bottom edge here and down here. Make sure everything is neat and tidy. Before I brush on my last coat of paint, I want to give this one more light sand just to smooth out any obvious brush strokes, and sometimes paint accumulates along the edges too that needs to be smoothed out. And I'm using my mister bottle to add a little bit of water to this last coat too, and just give the paint a little longer to level itself out as it dries so it's as smooth as I can get it. The last thing that I want to do to finish this off is just add a little bit of extra protection over top of the painted surfaces. The oil that I used on the tabletop, perfect, is going to be nice and durable. And Fusion mineral paint does have a really durable built-in top coat. But because this is a table that's going to get kicked and have chairs knocked into it and get greasy fingerprints, it's going to need a good scrub every once in a while. I just want to give it as much extra protection as I can. So I'm going to spray on a couple of coats of this Veneer diamond wood finish. It's a water-based polyurethane. This one's in a satin sheen. I'm spraying just because it's faster for me and I want to get this project done, but it can be brushed, or you can use a foam brush or a sponge to apply it as well. Once I get a couple of coats of this on and it's dry, I think I'm ready to take everything in the house, get the table assembled, and show you what it looks like all finished up. Which way does this go? Oh, hi. It is oak with the leaf and the base, which is not oak. From a sad little table that had been tossed out for trash to this gorgeous piece of furniture that's ready to live on in a brand new home. I don't know that I'm fully in love with the final tone of the wood on the top, but I don't hate it either. And I do know that this fresh finish will be appreciated by its new owners, whoever they may be. It still amazes me every single time how massive of a difference a little bit of paint and time can make on a blah piece of furniture. I hope you found some good tips and inspiration from this project and that you have a fantastic rest of your day. I'm gonna leave a few more table makeovers here for you to watch next if you want, and I will catch you all next time.